In less than 100 years, powerful empires were destroyed by a handful of outsiders. An entire colony vanished without a trace, and a new society was built on freedom while denying that freedom to others. How did all of this happen at the same time? In 1519, a Spanish soldier walked into one of the greatest cities on Earth with 600 men and brought an empire of 6 million people to its knees in 2 years. How is that even possible? Through that door Columbus had opened came men in iron armor carrying steel swords and gunpowder, and an appetite for gold so absolute that no quantity of suffering seemed to slow them down. They called themselves Conquistadors. In 1519, Hernán Cortés landed on the coast of Mexico with 600 soldiers and marched toward Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, a city of floating gardens, stone temples, and bustling markets that made every European city of the time look small and provincial. 3 forces combined to bring it down. Smallpox arrived ahead of the Spanish army and swept through the Aztec population with a devastating speed, killing warriors and leaders and ordinary people by the thousands before a single Spanish sword was drawn. Then Cortés discovered something crucial. The Aztec Empire ruled the surrounding peoples through fear and forced tribute, and those peoples despised their oppressors. Cortés built alliances of them and assembled an indigenous army of thousands who were glad to help destroy the empire that had terrorized them. Finally, an old Aztec legend worked against the empire, a prophecy about a pale, bearded god named Quetzalcoatl who had left and promised to return. When pale, bearded strangers arrived on the coast, some believed the god had come back. By the time the Aztecs understood what was truly happening, it was too late. In 1521, Tenochtitlan fell, was burned to the ground, and Mexico City was built on its ruins. A decade later, Francisco Pizarro led just 180 soldiers into the Inca Empire, captured Emperor Atahualpa through treachery, accepted a ransom of an entire room filled with gold, and then executed the emperor anyway. The Inca Empire, 12 million people strong, collapsed within years. When Spanish soldiers melted down the sacred golden artifacts of the Aztec and Inca civilizations to ship back to Europe as bullion, they destroyed irreplaceable works of art, history, and religious significance that had taken centuries to create, and the process took only days. 2 of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history were gone in less than 20 years. Their temples destroyed, their libraries burned, their gold melted into bars. But here is the question worth sitting with. If those civilizations had survived, if smallpox had never crossed the Atlantic, if the alliances had never been made, would the world we live in today look completely different? And would it be better or worse? In 1590, a man returned to a colony he had founded 3 years earlier and found 117 people completely gone. Not a single body, not a sign of violence, just one mysterious word carved into a wooden post. Nobody has solved it in over 400 years. While Spain was dismantling empires in the south, England was struggling to plant even a single seed of permanent settlement anywhere in the Americas. Their first serious attempt became one of history's most haunting mysteries. In 1587, 117 English colonists established a settlement on Roanoke Island off the North Carolina coast. Their governor, John White, sailed back to England for supplies and was delayed by 3 years by war. When he finally returned, the settlement was empty. No bodies, no signs of conflict. Every man, woman, and child had vanished, leaving only one word carved into a fence post: Croatoan. Nobody has solved it in over 400 years. England tried again in 1607, sending 3 ships with 104 colonists into the Chesapeake Bay to found Jamestown. What followed was catastrophic. The land was swampy and disease-ridden. The colonists were mostly gentlemen who had never farmed or built anything with their hands. They expected to find gold and found mosquitoes instead. In the winter of 1609, the starving time, the colony collapsed. Of 500 colonists, only 60 survived. They ate their horses, their dogs, their shoes, and in the worst days, dug up the dead and ate them too. Jamestown should have been abandoned. It almost was. Then, a colonist named John Rolfe cultivated a strain of tobacco that English smokers loved, and by 1620, brown gold transformed Jamestown into a thriving economic engine, at the cost of importing enslaved Africans to work the fields. In November 1620, a completely different kind of colonist arrived. Families of religious believers who crossed the Atlantic on the Mayflower, seeking freedom of worship. Pushed north of their intended destination by storms, they landed on Massachusetts coast, and before stepping off the ship, did something remarkable. They wrote and signed the Mayflower Compact, the first written agreement for democratic self-government in American history. During the starving time at Jamestown in the winter of 1609 to 1610, the colony's population fell from approximately 500 people to just 60 in a single season, a survival rate of only 12%. The Pilgrims who wrote the Mayflower Compact believed they were building a city on a hill, a model of godly, democratic society for the whole world to observe and admire. But within 50 years, their descendants would be fighting a war so brutal against the indigenous people around them that thousands would die on both sides. So here's the question: can a society truly be founded on the principles of freedom and equality while simultaneously taking land and lives that don't belong to it?
The fertile land.
By the mid-1700s, Britain had built 13 colonies along the American coast that were producing extraordinary wealth. But hidden inside that wealth was a contradiction so violent and so fundamental that it would eventually split the entire nation in two. Over 100 years of growth, 13 distinct English colonies stretched along the eastern coast of North America, from the cold fishing harbors of Massachusetts in the north to the warm tobacco plantations of Georgia in the south. They were not one unified society, but 3 very different worlds. New England was built on fishing, shipbuilding, and Atlantic trade, tight communities where town meetings gave ordinary citizens a direct voice in their own governance, planting habits of democratic thinking that would prove explosive. The middle colonies, stretching from New York to Delaware, were the breadbasket of the continent, diverse, prosperous, and more tolerant than most, particularly Pennsylvania, which William Penn founded in 1681 on the radical principle that people of different faiths could live and govern themselves together in peace. And in the South, across the vast plantations of Virginia, Carolinas, and Georgia, a completely different world had taken root, one built on tobacco, rice, and indigo, grown by the forced labor of enslaved African men, women, and children. By 1750, there were 250,000 enslaved people in the 13 colonies, and later the United States. The Middle Passage, the sea crossing from West Africa to America, killed between 15 and 20% of every person forced to endure it. Those who survived were stripped of their names, separated from their families, and worked without mercy in the fields of a country that was already beginning to talk about freedom and the rights of man. Between 1619, when the first enslaved Africans arrived in Virginia, and 1808, when the transatlantic slave trade was officially banned in America, an estimated 400,000 enslaved people were brought to the 13 colonies, and later the United States, and the economy built on their unpaid labor generated wealth that funded universities, banks, and political institutions that still exist today. The same generation of colonial thinkers who were debating liberty, natural rights, and the consent of the governed were also buying and selling human beings at public auction. How did those two realities exist in the same minds at the same time? And when Jefferson eventually wrote that all men are created equal, did he believe it? Did he mean it? And if he did, why did he go home to a plantation worked by over 600 enslaved people? In less than a century, empires fell, and entire worlds disappeared. But conquest was only the beginning, because while one world collapsed, another would vanish without a trace. Like and subscribe to Uncle Sam's Stories. The next chapter is even more mysterious.